Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here, and I'm back to discuss some more Van Damme. For this commentary on the 1989 classic Cyborg, I have Rob Hill, the author of the Bad Movie Bible, and runs the fantastic YouTube channel of the same name. How you doing, Rob?
All very well, thank you very much. I'm excited for some Cyborg.
Thankfully it's not the sequels, it's just the Van Damme classic. Now, this commentary can be enjoyed by itself, but if you wish to sync up your own copy of the movie, put the timestamp to 0 and press play now. Right, Rob. So, did you watch this movie when it came out in cinemas, or was it kind of a later find on VHS, which was very much my situation?
Yeah, I was. I'm not that old that I would have seen this in the cinema, but it did come out on VHS right as. I mean, it must have been, 1990 or maybe 91, I forget now, that it came out on VHS here in the UK. But it was just as I was becoming an absolute fanboy of Van Damme after Bloodsport. So I saw Kickboxer just before this.
Oh, right.
But this was the third Van Damme movie, the third Van Damme movie I'd seen. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I still do, to be honest.
Very much like you, I saw on tape. Also, I didn't try and presume you're too old, at the time to see it in the cinema. But a lot of my friends sort of sneaked into movies at like a younger age. Well, very crafty. But I was kind of wowed by the cover, because the iconic poster of this movie with you've got Van Damme with that kind of weird gun and all the villains at the bottom, and you've got a massive bridge in the background. Very sort of like catches your eye straight away. And I was a little bit mixed on this. When I saw it when I was younger, I was kind of because if you've seen like Bloodsport and Kickboxer, which are very much sort of martial arts focused, and you sort of kind of go into this with the same mentality that you're going to see Van Damme doing his usual traits, and he does kind of do it, but it's not like with the cutting. It's very quick cutting, and a lot of sort of, as we'll get to it later on with the final fight, it's very much that sort of double impact style editing where you've got a one kick will equal 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I love the opening to this movie with a fantastic matte painting that sort of expands this world I think it's by Fantasy 2, and you've got this kind of a Carolco, the sort of, was it Carolco? I think they just bought the Dino De Laurentiis kind of production studio or backlot, and sort of designed this kind of street city that was either going to be for Masters of the Universe Part 2 and Spider-Man.
Yeah. It's always been interesting trying to work out which, for those who don't know, famously Canon were going to make Spider-Man, and they were going to make Masters of the Universe 2, and Albert Pune was going to direct both of them in North Carolina, and the money fell through. Apparently the check bounced to Mattel, and the check never arrived for the other lot. And so they ended up with a bunch of costumes and sets that they'd spent $2 million on, and nothing to do with them. So Pune wrote the screenplay over the course of a weekend, and essentially repurposed Spider-Man's pre-production and Masters 2's pre-production into this. But it's always been tricky working out like how that could be, because what in the world of Spider-Man matches Cyborg?
Yeah. I always sort of presumed or sort of theorised that Fender's outfit was Skeletor's. That's all I could kind of think of, and everything else would have been, because it's weird. His idea for Masters 2 was that Skeletor had obviously come to Earth, and he had sort of created this kind of corporate company, and he kind of resided in this kind of tower, and He-Man had to he made his way through. I think he also said that He-Man was going from different like galaxies or different worlds, but he had to he finds him on Earth, and he sort of makes his way up his tower to fight Skeletor. And I thought it was kind of just a weird concept. And as we sort of go along with the idea with that, obviously Pune's original cut of this movie called Slinger, his ideas for this were kind of like really odd in terms of like how would it appeal to the market, and also the producers who wanted this kind of generic kind of apocalyptic sci-fi movie, and he's trying to do something a little bit more artistic, which was probably not the best thing for a canon movie at that stage. But it's like, we know later on where there was like a sewer section that's supposed to be how Spider-Man would have looked. But I think all this stuff here is very much like the design for Masters 2, which either could be a combination of the stuff on Eternia or like what Skeletor's done to the planet once he's arrived and taken over.
I know that Fender, the main villain's costume, was actually repurposed from the original Masters of the Universe. What's the henchman?
Really?
Blade. There's a henchman called Blade.
Yes.
He
Yes.
looks kind of like Andrew Tate, and his costume in the original Masters of the Universe features the wrist gauntlet things that Fender wears in this, and the chainmail. It looks like the chainmail top thing's been slightly reconfigured, but apparently that was the original that Blade wore in the first film.
Pretty much spot on, yeah. But I sort of imagine that probably because there's reused. I don't know. Yeah, so maybe there was no outfit there designed for Skeletor for the sequel, and this kind of repurposed Blade's outfit.
That's what I've read. But I mean, who knows? This is a movie written by Kitty Chalmers. We've just been told, which, as I'm sure you know, is actually Albert Pune's cat.
Oh, amazing. Because the original version of this was like there's supposed to be this kind of a religious cult that sort of emerged from this apocalyptic kind of setting where it's sort of this apocalypse had started or something like that, and originally had Chuck Norris was going to be the lead, making his way home to see his family, and obviously didn't want to. Obviously, Cannon wanted to utilize Van Damme due to the success of Bloodsport, and Van Damme I think was. During the course of making this, we'll start shooting Kickboxer, but he obviously would re-edit some of this movie. But that was a sort of shift in direction where they changed a lot of the kind of dialogue to suit Van Damme, or like some of the characteristics of him to sort of suit his style. And I know Van Damme's never been a huge fan of this movie, and and I know Albert Pune's been a little bit critical of Van Damme, where he was. I think Electric Boogaloo documentary where he said Van Damme was more concerned about how he looked than how he actually acted, because Van Damme's good at posing, on camera.
Oh yeah, and obviously that was written into it once he was cast, wasn't it? And I like the way you say that they changed his dialogue when Van Damme was cast. It might be more accurate to say they just removed it all because Pune didn't want Van Damme talking at all.
Just give him one little sentence, that you could remember.
In fact, he was dubbed, wasn't he, in Pune's original first cut before he lost control. He dubbed Van Damme. He removed almost all his dialogue and dubbed what was left.
Really? Because I know that they had dubbed sort of what's the name of Van Damme's character again? Oh, Gibson, where he was like his wife or something. We've seen the flashbacks.
Yeah.
She would eventually be dubbed over.
She's got Mary, I think her character's name is, and in real life she's got like a proper Southern Belle accent. She was obviously, I'm assuming, cast from somewhere around Carolina where they shot.
Yeah,
but yeah, it wouldn't quite have seemed right, I don't think, somehow.
I really like these sort of Fantasy 2 sort of stop motion effects. I think they're really good. I thought the transition of her pulling her sort of hair off and
do you know what? That's always fascinated me. And in preparation for this, I watched the short documentary on the special effects of this movie, and I was never able to work out how they do that shot where she takes her hair off. But it does transition from her to the animatronic. Actually, as her arm covers her head, there's a matte line that they painted on in every frame, and I think it looks stunning.
It does look great. I mean, it really holds up. And there's a lot of sort of repurposed Terminator visual effects with the data you see from her eye, and there's like later on there's bolts of lightning that are from a lightning coil that they'd use for the Terminator. Because I think that Fantasy 2 shot so much of this kind of like electricity, and they just kind of repurposed it for other movies.
Yeah, I remember seeing somewhere they used the original, was it like an arc generator or something, I can't remember, that was made for Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's right. There you go, Van Damme breaking out like very much like, I love that when their fists come out of rock. It's like Evil Dead 2. It's like rah, this hand comes out, they're just buried,
So yeah, it's almost like the first of many subtle anime references as well. That was a real anime shot somehow.
Yeah, because me and Rob were sort of just briefly discussing before recording this that there's a bit of a Fist of the North Star vibe, which we've already covered the live action movie with Gary Daniels a few months back. But yeah, throughout the sort of, when I reviewed this movie a number of years ago and sort of trying to go back through some of the information and some of the newer stuff, because obviously there's been new special editions of the movie and no one really brings up Fist of the North Star, and I think maybe it's just down to the fact that they're both very much Mad Max inspired in this apocalyptic wasteland. It's sort of, there's always going to have this kind of comparisons, and I don't think there's one were influenced by the other, or this was influenced by Fist of North Star. But you can't help but see that there's some sort of kind of anime vibe to it.
Yeah, certainly the characters as well, and the looks of the characters. They're very uncompromising and cartoonishly heavy-handed in a way.
They're proper cartoony. The chap playing Fender, not the greatest of actors. He seems like a really cool guy in interviews, but his acting in this is like atrocious. It's just the way I think maybe it's just the way he delivers his dialogue. He doesn't seem bright enough to want to take over the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. How did he? How on earth did he come up with this scheme to control the world's supply of this magical drug that's going to save everyone's lives? It doesn't seem right.
You think you could easily confuse him, couldn't you?
You could. I don't think any of the acting is particularly strong, really, when you think about it in this, because the main, what's her name, Nadi or Nadi, the main love interest, is also just kind of dreadful, if we're honest. Really, I mean, she's got, like Fender, she has presence and she looks great and so on, but
Van Damme's character gets stuck with this kind of airhead with him. You know what I mean? Where he's not really interested, because they've written him not to be interested in her, so she's just sort of tagging along.
Yeah. Doing nothing. I noticed in the commentary when Albert Pune's praising everyone except Van Damme, obviously, yeah. He gets to her and says, I wrote it down because it made me laugh so much. The only compliment he has for her is, her height worked well with Jean-Claude. So it's like, all right, okay. That's why she was cast.
Oh, amazing. For something that cost $500,000,
yeah,
they repurposed stuff. They had to shoot this really quickly. Script written over a weekend. They're really lucky how they sort of managed to sort of pull it off, and for it to become really successful. I mean, we made like $10 million in the USA alone. And we obviously found out later on that it became really popular in parts of Europe and in the Far East. Something like in Egypt, it played in Cairo for 2 years.
Yes, yeah.
Straight. That's madness. A film Cyborg of all things. There's great photos. If you go back to cinema, in cinemas of 1989, you always see Batman, in the summer of '89. Batman's screen one, and there's always Cyborg's there. So Cyborg did get shown even in the UK theatrically wide. And I had a colleague who worked for Canon Cinemas, and he said, when the Canon film came in, it will be on the biggest screen, and the movie that is ultimately a better movie would be on the small screen. So you can go watch Cyborg on the biggest screen possible that Canon may have owned, and watch something like, I don't know, Lethal Weapon 2 in a tiny screen.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, this cinema in Egypt that famously ran it for 2 years, was that owned by Canon, or is there some kind of explanation?
Maybe. Oh god, the flashback stuff with Van Damme's awful wig.
The hair is hilarious, isn't it?
It's like straw that just grabbed off the floor and just shoved it on his head.
And he's got no chemistry with this actress either. She's a model apparently, not wasn't actually an actress, but
that's right. Yeah, maybe he tried it on with her, and she was like, "Nope." He was like, "Right."
I'm assuming he did. I'm assuming he tried it on with her.
Van Damme can never help himself.
This is his reputation, isn't it? Every set he's on, he tries it on with all the women, punches all the stuntmen, and disappears at lunchtime to hit his motorhome table, shall we say?
Yeah. There's always a kind of weird thing with this movie, because when I watched it when my friends were younger, you're always good at sort of get a bunch of Van Damme movies and plough through them over the weekend. And the premise of this movie always got them excited, even though some of them had probably seen it before and maybe forgotten about it, or just thought, oh, it wasn't as good the first time, maybe it's better the second time, and they kind of watch it, and halfway through they're kind of not interested in the movie. I think does have its kind of lulls, and I know it's got a huge fan base and people love it, and obviously other people actually, some other friends just despise the movie. As I mentioned, Van Damme, it doesn't speak that highly of it, but I think the visual elements of it, and this sort of its brutal nature to it, and I think people, that's why people sort of love it, I think. And it's such a simple movie to sort of get into, but I think if you're expecting something more challenging, then you
Yeah,
find yourself a bit
you're
fed up.
right. It's not got the overall broad and constant appeal of a movie like Bloodsport,
No.
but it looks fantastic. It really does look fantastic. Pune is so good at making the pennies go far, and he had all these all these sets and costumes and so on that were way out of his budget. And he does an incredible job with them in terms of making it all look great. And like you say, it's a great idea. You read the synopsis and you want to watch it, and halfway through, yeah, people tend to lose interest because it just isn't really working somehow as a movie. But I can get past that because it just looks so great, and because the characters are so well drawn, even though they're not well acted.
I love how the cinematographer sort of lit the stuff so blue that they couldn't filter it out.
Yes, I've heard
I love
that.
it. I love that. I love that approach. Just like, don't fuck with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There are set pieces that are, just simple action scenes, simple fight scenes, but because of where they take place and because of how they're shot, they're elevated.
It's always. I don't know if I've discussed this with you before, but I think anything that's sort of apocalyptic, once you've got sort of a rundown area, you've already got a great location, and I think that's why we saw so many of these movies kind of spin out the 80s, thanks to Mad Max, and also Albert Pune would continue that trend, either having this kind of apocalyptic sort of wasteland with cyborgs. Always throwing in some sort of robot thing.
Kickboxing cyborgs in the post-apocalypse. That's a concept legally owned by Albert Pune.
Oh yeah. That's why I love the movie Nemesis. I think it's brilliant, and I love even with this Pune is, as I've been told, like through other people that have worked with him, like he's very efficient and able to sort of get the right angles really quickly, and you see like even with the fight scenes, he's covered them from like multiple angles.
Yeah.
And it makes a great use of that footage to create this kind of really frantic sort of edits and fight scenes. Like Captain America, despite it being an absolute turd of a movie, like by the end when you see Captain America do something, and then there's some like good editing going there with the fight scene, and it's like shot from so many different angles. It's great, but
he's got a great eye, and he's really good at coming up. There's a shot a minute ago actually when we were kind of looking down on the child Van Damme was looking at. He's really good at composing shots that are kind of interesting and look really well conceived, but I gather it only takes him a moment to come up with them. But without pushing it too far, he's not tempted to slap a massive Dutch angle on there as well, or to set it up with 3 establishing shots cut quickly. He never goes over the top, but at the same time, he's never boring.
No, it's always, I've always found his films kind of genuinely interesting and entertaining. Sometimes for the wrong reasons, but it's never him as a sort of visual filmmaker. I think he's always had that attitude of being very much independent and controlling his own vision. And I always kind of wish that if he was given a lot of money to use, he would have created something really special. But he just never. I think he was so adamant about keeping his own vision. He sort of kept him in that sort of niche market of low budget, kind of straight to video kind of fodder. But he was always, his old IMDb, he was always working, wasn't he?
He was always working, yeah. The projects do get smaller as the B-movie industry kind of shrank in the 90s there. But and also he never really managed to get away from the old kickboxing cyborgs, which I ended up watching.
Well, he got away from some of it with Doll Man, but
I suppose, yeah.
It was I think a wasted opportunity of Pune's, where he never actually has fun with the size of the man and the sort of creating large objects for him to interact with. There's none of that really. It's so silly. See, Van Damme literally said nothing to her. It's just like, I think he said the odd few words. God, he must be a right drag to his character to hang around with,
Yeah, I think there were a few people on the set who didn't have the best of times. I know a lot of people had a great time, and people generally like working with Albert Pune, but I know Van Damme really cemented his reputation amongst particularly stuntmen and your specialist actors who are brought in for the martial arts scenes or whatever. He really did cement his reputation as a bit of an arsehole. on this set.
Because he got sued, didn't he? Because he half blinded a guy, didn't he, in the eye? Like one guy lost his
Yeah,
eye.
yeah, it's quite that was a big deal, I think, because I actually read the case a while ago because I've always wanted to know exactly what the details were, and I found online the whole, I don't know if you call it a deposition or what, but the whole explanation and what his arguments were and what the other guys were, and it was a bit fishy because the guy waited a few years before taking any action. So obviously, you could say that's because there was no point in taking action against someone who didn't have any money, or you could say he was waiting for him to become a big star, so he'd have something to hopefully draw on. But yeah, he got nearly $500,000 awarded to him in court that Van Damme had to pay himself. Van Damme's wage for the movie was $50,000, by the way, so 10 times more than that. But it's all down to, this is all in the court papers, so don't worry about being sued yourself for my claiming wrongly. But he was basically repeatedly told to stop making contact with the other actors and the stuntmen, and there were a few who decided they weren't going to work with him anymore. And then when the incident actually happened, it's a fight scene at the end, and he catches the guy with the blade of a rubber knife, and he was told to palm the blade, so the blade was facing backwards because he couldn't tell in the shot, and refused to do it. Got the guy in the eye, and then apparently kind of stood over him saying, "Get up, don't be such a wimp." It all came down to so many people gave evidence in that case, people that he'd worked with before. Some guy he worked, a stuntman he worked with on No Retreat, No Surrender, who he kicked in the balls so hard the guy couldn't stand for 5 minutes.
Oh my God.
And casting directors, all sorts of people came out, all saying exactly the same thing, that he had no respect for people and would make contact.
And then Hong Kong movies, they do have contact, but it's not like really hard. But it's sort of you're gonna get some sort of you're gonna get hurt a little bit.
Yeah, it's controlled contact.
Yeah, because Cynthia had said she got used to telling them more. She was told in Hong Kong more power, more power. So and she also comes home all bruised and stuff on her wrists and arms, and she goes back to America and starts hitting the stuntmen. They're like, "Ow!"
Yeah.
They're getting hurt. But Van Damme was just like he was gonna kick you hard. But it's like there's a great story on Graham Norton with one of the Hemsworths gets kicked in the chest by Van Damme. He's like, it's a controlled kick. He goes, "Nah, mate, it's not controlled. Just kick me in the chest." So good.
Yeah, there are. Funnily enough, the guy, the stuntman, I should name him actually. His name's Jackson Pinkney, and he'd, funnily enough, done an interview the year before saying how much he prefers working in Hong Kong because the stunts are more physical because you actually make contact there. So I think that was then brought in evidence against him in the trial.
It's like, you wanted to get stabbed in the eye, right?
Yeah, to be fair, there's a difference between making controlled contact and stabbing someone in the eye.
So obviously now we're seeing with this, I mean, it must be pickup shots. I'm not sure because the original version there wasn't a virus, right? So as Van Damme, obviously we haven't discussed why it was changed, but Pyun had this kind of weird idea to sort of have this movie in black and white. And the kind of rock soundtrack, and it was about again this man escaping from this kind of religious sect that was kind of which is kind of the head leader was Fender. Obviously, previewed to the executive producers at Canon, they hated it. They all had headaches on the music and the black and white visuals. So they thought, this movie's kind of, how are we going to salvage this? And Van Damme had obviously caught wind of this through his friend Sheldon Lettish, who was at the preview. And I think maybe they actually previewed it in colour to an audience, and they didn't like it. So that got back to Van Damme, who was shooting on Kickboxer. And like Bloodsport, Van Damme and Sheldon would re-edit the film to sort of salvage it, and it made it hit. But, Pyun wanted this black and white film in cinema scope as well, and there was no idea of this kind of virus. Obviously, they threw in the virus with this new cut. So I thought, with that girl with the sort of, the blisters on her face, was that either a pickup or was that kind of just part of this apocalypse where she'd, malnourished or whatever? I don't know, but it'd be interesting to find out what they actually shot. I know that near the end they shot pickups to sort of extra like bits do the battle in the city again in the rain. But
Yeah. I've always assumed that plague girl was one of the pickup shots, and likewise the handoff at the end to when the data's handed off to the doctors.
yeah,
But yeah, it was Pune apparently when he first screened it, the black and white one, which he'd only decided to do. I didn't know this till recently, but he'd only decided to screen it in black and white because he hadn't conceived it that way before he shot it. But he had at some point seen a rough cut telecine or something that happened to be in black and white, and he decided it looks great. It reminded him of Kurosawa, which is interesting. And so he decided just off the cuff that he'd temp score it with Def Leppard music and present it in black and white to Canon. And yeah, apparently it was Yoram Globus who just couldn't bear it. He absolutely couldn't bear it. Pune said he saw his head sink halfway through and his fingers go in his ears. He knew then it wasn't going to be a good response.
my favourite bit, we said Europe threw a stapler at him.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. But it was, it's just for a lot of trivia for a number of years. Well, this was the last Canon movie released like theatrically. I think there was other movies released, I think theatrically as well. But I think maybe this was probably the last sort of big wide release they did.
Well, this was the
in
last
89.
one before they were sold to that guy. What's his name? That
Oh, the
spiv.
Italian guy. I think he owned the Pathé or Pathé.
Yes,
label or
yeah, and he
something,
tried to combine. So it was definitely the last theatrical release before it was sold. So the last one that Menachem would have been involved with, because he left the company, I think, when that happened. But strangely, the first theatrical release the following year, under the new rebadged Canon, still called Canon, owned by this Italian guy, was Kickboxer. So
right, yeah.
Van Damme was both the last and the first.
I'm sure Kickboxer wasn't a Canon movie, but it was distributed by Canon.
So that might be right, actually. Yeah. So that might be right. Yeah.
Because people get confused. Because people it's funny on Facebook and sort of Canon film groups, and they're like, "Oh, Highlander's a Canon movie." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's just distributed by Canon in a couple of territories, for God's sake." But
yeah, on Canon's filmography, it's broken into parts depending on who owned the company at the time, and yeah, it goes straight from this being the last of one group to Kickboxer being the first of the next. But yeah, no, I think you're right actually that they just distributed it.
this is cut from so many different angles. I love this stuff here.
Yeah.
It's all good. This is all Van Damme's edit, clearly.
Yeah.
But then you also see some of this style of stuff in Lambert Pune's, Nemesis. It's very quick, so it's hard to sort of decipher who does what. But I think when you see one kick that becomes three kicks, that's clearly Van Damme.
You know Latish is involved somewhere when that happens. Was it? He did. He shot AWOL, didn't he? Directed AWOL.
Yeah, I love AWOL, but it's too much of repeating the same punch from different angles. God, Let's just grab his balls. Here you go, whack. It's a great location, isn't it? I mean, you have so much fun with this.
Because that's it. These Mad Max environments are generally used because they're cheap. Anyone can go and film in the desert. Anyone can go and film in Nevada or whatever. But this is a level up. It's not just shooting where there's no one to chase them away. They've actually gone and found interesting locations and visually interesting places.
You could argue, that this is visually more interesting than Mad Max, because Mad Max is very much just got a desert sort of backdrop.
Yeah,
nothing. There were no buildings, especially for the sequel.
Yeah,
you just got essentially centered around this kind of this oil refinery. So I mean, like now, there's large parts of America where there's like no one there. There's always just empty towns, or where the economy just collapsed and people left, and you can still again do something similar, in a modern film, especially when when we had COVID. I think if I lived in London, I would have grabbed a camera. if you had a camera equipment, and just walked around London shooting all this footage where it's empty, completely fucking empty, and then sell that footage, you could just license it out to so many movies.
That's a really good idea. Well, that would have been a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm sure some people have done that. I'm sure.
I worked on one of the first films I worked on in post-production was 28 Days Later.
Oh, nice.
And the effort involved in achieving that opening, or that shot near the start across Westminster Bridge, sorry, where it's completely deserted.
Maybe like 5 a.m, wasn't it?
Yeah. But even then, they've still got to close roads, and 5 o'clock in the morning on Westminster Bridge, there's always going to be traffic and people. But yeah, that would be really valuable stock footage.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I'm sure people have done it. Because I as soon as this happened, the COVID happened, I was like, this has got to be done. You can get so much great footage when no one's around. You can just use it, and you can just comp stuff in if you wanted to. You know what I mean? So you've got a clean slate. And even Gibson just turned her down as well. He needs to get revenge, doesn't he, for his kind of awkward flashback where he gets put in a well. Timmy down a well,
And somehow one little girl acts as the counterweight to 3 people hanging on the other end of the wire, if I remember rightly.
That would have ripped straight through her hands. Gone.
This was a thing in the 90s as well, wasn't it? This was about to become a thing. The chivalrous hunk who has women throwing themselves at him, but he's just too good for them.
Well, usually Van Damme's like, he's always got to be some bit of nudity in his movies. Either he's got to sleep with someone, or he's going to get his bum out.
Yeah, it's not only just an excuse for him to get his arse out.
I still love the I think Gene Siskel review of Time Cop. We just complained that there should be more Van Damme nudity. And Roger Ebert's just like perplexed by what he said. But Gene knew that a lot of people go just to see Van Damme and his body.
Do they though? Did they?
Don't know, mate. We have to do a poll. People that went back in the day. Did you go for his bum or for the movie itself?
I went for the splits, personally.
I went for the splits. But this is interesting because in the action scene we see a bit later on with him doing the splits. Like Pune was just like, "Oh, you can do the splits. You can go up there and just position yourself." He's like, "I can't do it for that long." So they have to sort of cable him, don't they, to sort of hold him up as he does the splits. But it's an iconic scene again.
Again, yeah. But I've always wondered even if you can do the splits, how did he get in that position in the first place? Because there's just no means of doing it.
Yeah, maybe he's half Spider-Man. This is a weird flashback where they're just literally looking through their window watching them have sex. God. Yeah, that was the other thing about the flashbacks are never strong enough to sort of really create. I don't know. Maybe for some people, it might create this kind of you understand his motive. It's very simple, but it's still needed a bit more work done, I think. And obviously because the look of everything, especially with Van Damme's awful wig, it's hard not to laugh at it, and take it seriously.
And you just don't know what material they had to work with, given how much Van Damme changed. I mean, he changed the entire plot. He changed the objective of the whole film.
Well, he's got his binoculars out there. He's looking for the plot. I think, really.
I've just seen an idea.
That's an idea.
You just don't know what they had to work with, what they had to just hope we'd second guess.
Yeah. Everyone's hot and sweaty on that boat. It's when it's not. I think you'd rather sit outside, to be honest.
I don't think she's got much choice in where she is, to be honest.
Did they actually? I can't remember that they actually explain what the virus does. It just kills you, right?
I don't remember any detail. No.
They're just all they're doing is sort of the cyborg is sort of taking the cure, basically, all the because it was supposed to. Pyun's version was supposed to restore technology.
Yes.
You think, what? If someone told you that, this thing's going to restore technology, but what is it? Well, it has to be a power source, wouldn't it? But you can't have a robot that's going to restore technology by giving you information. It doesn't make sense.
None of it makes sense. And presumably you've seen him try to explain it, and I don't think it made any sense to him either. He was just making it up as he went, I'm sure.
So what is this technology? Is that a calculator? What is it, a computer? It's like an Apple Newton. Oh, right.
If there are convincingly human cyborgs roaming about, then presumably technology is still operating up to a certain level anyway. It's
exactly. Because they must, if they're still cyborgs, then they're smart enough to actually utilize whatever technology they have, or materials to sort of renew a power source or whatever. It seems doesn't it?
Maybe there was actually more of an explanation about that, and it would explain why there are cyborgs. Because as things stand, it doesn't make any sense that there are cyborgs in this world. What she does, despite all this stuff now, nothing she does is actually a result of her being a cyborg. It's not necessary. She could be carrying a USB stick in her pocket, and it'd essentially be the same. And they're in a world where even cars are, there's no fuel to run them, there's no one to repair them, yet these incredibly sophisticated cyborgs are still operating fine.
It's throwing in cyborgs because RoboCop and Terminator are still a thing, still popular. It's just like people just love it, and it's an easy thing. Because so many movies, as you've covered, Rob, on your channel, there's so many sort of rip-offs of Terminator. It's not even funny. It's funny when you see them, but it's just how silly that it's sort of the genre became overstuffed with essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Is this the first cyborg movie that he made? Off the top of my head, I think it is, but I can't be sure now.
I'm not sure if Cyborg's in like Radioactive. Is it Radioactive Dreams?
No,
I've not seen. I want to see that movie.
I think So after this, he did Nemesis, didn't he? And then sank down into the whole Heat Seeker and Amiga Doom quagmire.
Deceit after this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he did Deceit, Captain America, Blood Match, Kickboxer 2, Dollman, and then Nemesis, and then it sort of went on with.
I think Nemesis was his next kickboxing cyborg in the future movie.
Yeah, his masterpiece.
Yeah. I think objectively, it could be a better film than this. Really, I prefer Cyborg, but it's.
I think Cyborg is. I like the use of its locations, where Nemesis seems like they've just gone back to the same location in Dollman and kind of reused that. It's always a sort of disused factory. Albert Pin loves that sort of look,
And he loves Olivier Gruner, which I've always had. I've never been a big fan of Olivier Gruner, and Van Damme was always my boy as a kid. So he does bring
European
something.
actors who do martial arts, it's got to be Van Damme.
Yeah, Gruner was so obviously brought on to be the new Van Damme as well, wasn't he? It was cast immediately in a kickboxing. Was it Savat? Was that his first film with his accent as well? And he was clearly meant to be the new Van Damme.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he's he could. His martial arts skills were impeccable, but he just he could be outacted by a piece of wood, couldn't he? Really, that was a shame. He just had the look, and he had presence on camera, but maybe he just needed a little bit more work on his acting. Maybe I'm not seeing his later stuff, but he may have got better, but
no, he hasn't.
He's still in loads of stuff though. He
is.
He's even directed stuff as well.
There's a role for him in like your John Wick movies. John Wick does a really good job of casting like henchmen from among like proper. Who's the guy?
Dacascos.
The guy who's actually in Bloodsport. No, well, he's another example. Yeah, no, but slightly less well known. The guy from Bloodsport 2, who plays the Van Damme role in Bloodsport 2. He's also in.
They brought him back.
Future War. He's the main henchman in the first film. And the thing about those guys is they're of an age now. They're about they're in their 50s. They're still incredibly fit. They look great, and that grey and that bit of dignity that comes with age, put them in a dead sharp suit, and they look incredible as these henchmen.
And Gruner hasn't had his chance yet, Well, that's why it's, with the Expendables. I mean, the first one should have had like the Cascos in, Olivier Gruner and the guy from Bloodsport 2, whatever. Just sort of these B players that everyone loved, or like Matthias Hughes or Cynthia Rothrock was always annoyed that she wasn't put in the Expendables. It's like, he's a bit of a sausage fest. And,
Don the Dragon as well. Don the Dragon should have been in something like that. Even though, again, I'm not the biggest fan, to be honest, but he is a legend.
But they did their sort of cheap version, didn't they? Of the Expendables. I don't know what it's called. The Expandables or something. I don't know. The Regretables. I don't know. The Forgettables. There we go. But yeah, it just seemed a bit odd with the casting. But this is always like, I remember, especially with I think it's maybe an MGM Canon tape. I think it was, and I always had it at the beginning. But especially those, even if you picked up Bloodsport, you'd have trailers at the beginning advertising other movies, and the Cyborg was always on it. There's always these kind of little moments here from it where you sort of see him, kind of the camera sort of on the dolly just goes straight towards Fender. It's a great shot.
That really memorable shot.
I can never make sense of Van Damme's gun. I don't know what it is. It's just like, it looks like an Uzi with like this kind of weird like multiple barrel thing on. We just kind of uses it to reload. I don't know. This looks cool. That's what it's about.
It's brilliant.
He's got the same gun. He's got the same gun as well, actually, as Fender. Okay.
Also, all very anime-like.
You were saying with the hair, weren't you?
Yeah,
very,
but
like,
Van Damme's hair,
spiky.
I've always wondered whether that's spiky, whether that's a deliberate nod, but like that crash zoom in on Fender then, that was pure anime. There should have been
I love it.
like sun lines shooting out from behind him or something.
It's like he's Guile. Van Damme's hair is more Guile like than actually in Street Fighter.
Yeah,
it has more length to it. It kind of weird. It looks like it shoots like nails and stuff. It's kind of... I remember the sound design not being particularly great with the guns. Just like doof. It needs to be a bit more meaty. That's such a good shot.
It's great, isn't it? Again, it's really striking and dramatic, but not over the top or boring. This would have looked good in a wider format. This sequence.
Yeah, it's because Albert Piano, prior to this, had shot in 2351, and we kind of wanted the movie in, but clearly, they demanded to shoot spherical. I mean, I suppose he was kind of hoping to shoot Super 35, which he could then mat to 2351. But it's just, because Canon always had like, oh no, most films are shot in this format. It's just kind of a typical thing of theirs, because I think they were very savvy with with pan and scanning, for the VHS market, where if you could shoot something in 2351, you got to pay more for the pan and scan.
Oh, that's a good
to get
point.
it right.
Yeah.
And then I just shoot straight down the middle on this and don't have to do much scanning. I don't think they don't do any pan and scanning. That's a lot. You end up just losing the left and right a little bit. That's when I watch even like Superman 4, where they're shot in 2351. Everything's so centered in that movie. Like they knew it was going to be pan and scanned anyway, so there's no actual real creative use of that format.
I really wish that Fender would give his glasses a wipe. I find it so distracting every time he gets a close-up. He wouldn't be able to see anything out of those sunglasses.
I know, yeah. I always love it in movies where they wear shades in like complete darkness. I'm like, you idiots. you don't look cool anymore, you look stupid.
I think Fender could pull it off.
Yeah. That'd be sexy in the dark. This is a moment now where he goes into the sewers, right? I think.
Yeah, we're coming up to it. Yeah.
Is that guy with the long hair? Is he the one from Gladiator?
Yeah,
Ralph
Moeller or Mueller.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was also. No, God, I've dropped the ball in one of your commentaries before on a factoid, but I want to say he was TV Conan as well. Not TV Conan, TV Hercules. Oh God, I can't remember now. Before
it would be the TV Hercules, would it? I mean,
not Kevin Sorbo, not that one.
Not Kevin Sorbo.
Oh, I can't remember now.
But he was he was in Universal Soldier playing one of the other
Yeah,
Unisols. He had a larger role in Gladiator. I think when most people kind of, I think gave him a bit more of a stardom, like, awareness. But he's always good as a supporting kind of like muscle man, wasn't he? And he
exactly.
was
I remember
always...
cheering when he cropped up in Gladiator, thinking like,
Oh, did you?
Jesus, this is a proper film, and he's got like one of his best roles ever. It's not even some crappy B movie.
Yeah, and you also care about his character as well, which is
Yeah,
great because he's always just like hasn't really no lines, And we tried to interview him for In Search of the Last Action Heroes, but he wanted a lot of money. Well, like my producer was just like, "What? You're in Gladiator. What? That's the only thing you're kind of known for, mate." But yeah, that was a shame. It would have been good to have his thoughts.
I think that when they do that, people of his stature, I think it's like, I can't be asked. I just can't be bothered. But if you pay me something stupid, suddenly I'll be bothered. I know Red Brown's like that. Red Brown wants, I think it was like 15 grand or something utterly ridiculous for an interview.
What? Oh my God. Oh dear, oh dear. But he was Captain America though, wasn't he?
He was Captain America.
With his stupid outfit.
Technically, with his little
Terrible.
motorcycle helmet.
Oh, it was awful. Awful. Red Brown was like the best at like just like outburst of screams and suddenly silence.
Yeah,
And stops.
yeah. Oh, Space Mutiny has got some classic moments like that in Space Mutiny.
As I was saying the other day, we were talking about The Swarm. It's a bit like the acting style of Michael Caine, where Michael Caine just talks very, very, very softly and saying like, "You fucking bad," just goes mad and suddenly silence.
One of my absolute favourite performances, Michael Caine in The Swarm.
It's wonderful. I love how they've sort of slow-moed people running. It's like, yeah, don't slow-mo running. Maybe they're just so beefy. That's all they can do. We just do a brisk jog. So it's the dad run, really, isn't it? So yeah, in the commentary for this, I think it was part of the Shout Factory release. They actually did a proper special edition, and they ported all the extras over. Or 88 films had this, obviously licensed that material. Pyun sort of said this was kind of how Spider-Man would have looked, with its sort of textures, its colour, and it's obviously with the lizard. It will always be the main villain of Spider-Man, would be in this sort of setting. And I think, weirdly, if Masters 2 came out and Spider-Man got made, and this never got made, I think both those movies would still be kind of like really interesting to watch. And again, there would be movies that would be made with good intent and they wanted to make a good product. And I think they both would have been like perhaps like Superman 4, perhaps, or didn't live up to expectations and had something interesting in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially with Spider-Man, I'd imagine. Because they're coming up with some interesting stuff and how they're going to visualize Spider-Man kind of crawling up the walls, or this kind of like rotating cylinder he would go in where like the camera would turn as he's going up the wall or something. So you do it on a cheap, but it looks like it's expensive. But yeah, I mean, Masters 2, this would have been the most weirdest one out of the bunch, and I think it would have been like, yeah, it wouldn't have had the same energy of the first one, and what you loved about it, what I love about it, wouldn't have been carried over. It would have been so radically different that it would have just been like, oh, they could have done this and that, and where's Dolph? Where's Frank Langella? There'd be no Frank Langella in it.
I don't think anyone had really figured out those. Neither of those movies made any sense to me. I can't see how Canon were ever going to do a half decent Spider-Man on the kind of budget that by this point, because Superman 4 was what was it, 87?
It was 86. It was made.
86.
87. It came out. Yeah.
So they were still in 1986. Canon still had a bit of money. They still had a bit of resource.
Yeah,
whereas by the time this was made, they were really up against it. So that I think they'd have been working on an even lower budget than Superman 4. They'd have had Pune directing, not Sidney Furie, and I think it would probably have been an absolute disaster.
Well, it was kind of funny because Cine Fantastic magazine, I found an old article where Pune, obviously Pyun was interviewed for Electric Boogaloo, but in the extended interview they did, obviously not all of it made the cut in the documentary, but he explored Superman 5, Spider-Man, and Masters 2. And I put a clip up on YouTube, but he'd not YouTube, on Facebook, but he said he was going to do Superman 5, and obviously they were touting the idea that they're going to use all the deleted footage from Superman 4, put it into Superman 5. It would have been made no sense, and so obviously that quickly sort of collapsed, and they just sort of went straight to Spider-Man and Masters too, and obviously both those checks bounced to sort of continue the agreement or to make these movies, and as you said earlier on, they sort of just hastily put this together and got some money out of it, which was great in the end.
I bet it's one of Cannon's more profitable films of the era.
It was, wasn't it? Because it just the profit margins were huge, and like they had so many, everything bombed pretty much. We don't know the real numbers of people would say, oh, Masters of the Universe wasn't successful, but anyone of a similar age has seen that movie, so it must have done really well on video.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I think on video it killed.
And obviously videotapes were expensive back then. You know what I mean? Like to rent, for video store to buy them, it costs like 90 quid.
Yeah.
And so you go through old magazines like Starburst, and you can see them selling these new movies at retail price, wholesale price, and they're like 90 quid, 60 quid.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It's mad, isn't it? And there's a random smoke machine in the background. You see, where's the smoke coming from?
I did notice that rewatching it, actually. There is a lot of smoke in this movie without there ever really being an explanation for it.
No. All films have it. It's just a cheap way of adding some atmosphere, and it always fools you. I was like, looks great. Till you think about it, it makes no sense.
Apparently this location was going to be the swamp where Lizard, the Spider-Man's antagonist, was going to be found or lived or whatever. This was a location that Pyun wanted to reuse. He really liked this swampy field.
It's like the same sort of swampy area they used in Invasion USA.
Yes.
Chuck Norris lives with his... yes, I got that film. I did a commentary to that with Stuart Ashen, and it was just like you sort of realise they edited out all the entire plot and just left in the action. It kind of still makes no sense.
I love that film. I've got an original one sheet of that framed in the living room. It's the only it's the only silly poster my wife lets me have up in public.
The only silly poster.
And it's basically just because every time she took it down, I just put it back up, and this is just going to go on forever unless you give in. I love this poster. You don't understand.
Cannon were great at posters, weren't they?
Oh,
that's what made them so successful, weren't they?
And that Invasion USA that's the best poster I've ever seen. I love it.
Yeah, it is one of the best. Yeah, because some of the other Chuck Norris posters are a bit. Like the Delta Force poster's pretty good. The sequel one's a bit naff,
Yeah. Yeah, and then the DVD and videos often ended up with complete crap.
DVD especially, when they sort of, started doing these kind of crappy photoshopped kind of designs. I forgot she chopped her hand off. Oh, I had to slow-mo that. It wasn't shot in slow-mo.
No.
Oh. No. And you can tell, if they played it back at normal speed, when she falls over, it was such a clumsy... on the floor. They had to slow-mo it to actually make it kind of to get away with it. It's great.
This guy here, this guy is Blaze Lung, who I think he plays a few different henchmen or bad guys in this. Unless he's meant to be the same character, but he keeps changing clothes. And I think
the big muscle dude running towards him, he's in Maximum Risk. He fights Van Damme in the lift.
Yes, yeah. There's a couple of Van Damme's ended up being buddies with. I'm guessing they're the ones who didn't give depositions in the court case. But no. Blaze Lung there, I think, as far as I can work out, unless you might know better actually, I've never been able to work out who actually did the choreographing of the fight scenes. Obviously Van Damme would have done a lot of it, but Lung had done a lot of that kind of thing before, and he seems to have been kind of in charge of all the specialist stuntmen and martial artists.
Because Van Damme, I know, had his own personal trainer, where Albert Pyun said everyone else was trained by the film's trainer. Like they hired an individual to train everyone else. But usually with Van Damme, you kind of he does his own thing because you can kind of see, or maybe the fight choreographer on this movie, who you sort of highlighted, could have just made use of what Van Damme's good at. But often the case, it's Van Damme would choreograph his earlier movies, and that's also a bit of a downside sometimes because he wasn't like his fight scenes were never that elaborate. They're always kind of quite basic. It would just be like a block punch and a kick, but the kick it'd never be like punch block it'd never be like Hong Kong stuff. It would be very straightforward. He'd punch them and they'd be knocked out, right? Or a kick. But it's a good, Van Damme's kicks always look the best, didn't they?
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, presumably he knows, well, he thinks he knows what makes him look good, and he's very certain that that's how he should look. But sometimes you just need someone with a bit more perspective, maybe a better understanding of what the camera is going to add to the situation as well. He does look great, Fender, doesn't he? As far as the intimidating villains
costume
go.
design goes a long way, doesn't it? Fender doesn't do any like martial arts, just like a punch him again.
Yeah.
It's just like, you can block that, come on, mate.
Some people don't look quite right throwing a punch as well, and I'm not sure whether he really pulls it off.
He doesn't. Later on, when he pulls out the knife and slashes Van Damme at the end, it's like a bit of a rubbish take. They've had to but they repeat it like 3 times. It's like, why did you do that? But also, he obviously now he's going to get crucified, and that plays into the original idea, doesn't it? With the Pyun's direction was this kind of religious group, and
and it's you get the feeling that's the one sequence that Pyun shot that Van Damme was quite happy to include because it basically makes him out to be Christ.
That LC visual looks really good, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's really well shot. But yeah, with this movie, when I had reviewed it, there was a score done by, I think it's James Sadd and Anthony Ripperetti. They got rejected, but it had like great synthy kind of score with mixed in with electric guitar and stuff, and it had multiple layers to it. But they got obviously rejected, and they brought on Kevin Bassinson, something like that. But his score was very of its time, and also when you have a low budget movie, you're going to go electronic approach. Obviously, Bloodsport Kickboxer will come out shortly after this by Paul Herzog. So you've got that's what they would utilize, electronic kind of score, and this would follow suit. And it sounds a bit too cheap in areas. It's like it's got a theme and it's got recognizable kind of motifs, but in it. But you think when you hear the rejected score, you think, oh my god, that actually had a lot more kind of time put into it. Where this was obviously done very quickly. This score, it sounds like anyway.
At least it didn't end up with a knockoff Def Leppard score.
Yeah. There's some weird scores to movies like with Canon. Like Death Wish 3 has a weird, like jazzy score. Even like Street Smart as well. They don't have proper. They get like musicians to do like popular musicians to do like this kind of weird score. It doesn't really fit the movie. Like Death Wish 3, if that had a proper synthy score, it would have been brilliant. But it's just this weird. God, who scored number 3? I remember someone. I think it. Death Wish 3.
I think it still uses bits of Jimmy Page's guitar, doesn't it?
Yes, I think you might be right. Yes, Jimmy Page. Yeah.
What was it? Oh my god.
Yeah, it didn't really work for the movie, I thought. So this girl, right, as well, who like obviously comes to Van Damme's help near the end. She tries to stop Fender from killing him or something like that. But we don't really know her full connection. Either she just wants to escape from this kind of group, or it's. Or was it the girl in the flashback?
Well, yes, so she's the younger sister of Van Damme's dead wife. So she was the one holding the barbed wire, as I understand it.
Right. Okay.
But she was originally meant to be the daughter. But then at the last minute, I think after they shot, Pune decided she was the actress playing the mother was too young, so they made her the sister and the little boy the brother. But as I remember it, it's thoroughly unclear. Yeah, all those connections that aren't really explained.
Yeah, because Van Damme stares at it like he doesn't know her. You know, like we don't. There's no dialogue between them. I don't think.
No, and it doesn't really make sense that if she's going to turn, what that's about as powerful a moment and an image and a scenario as you're ever going to get if you want to make someone change their character. But instead, she just randomly changes at the end when after Fender punches him or something. That's enough to change her.
They should have had her, trying to stop them from crucifying him, and they just sort of put her in her place, maybe. And then she's kind of like just has to go along with it. But there's none of that.
Yeah, or have her turn, but then be dragged off to give Van Damme more motivation to.
Should have said something like, "Do you remember me?"
Yeah.
Bloody Van Damme's awful wig again.
It is just so funny, isn't it? It just looks so wrong. And no two people have ever looked more out of place next to each other as a couple than these two. They just are not remotely convincing somehow. She's a good height as well, though.
She is as well, yeah. Is that the same house they shot the Turtles in 1990? It looks like the same place they'd used like when the Turtles escape, isn't it? Because I know the editor of this, she said she turned down Ninja Turtles.
Yes, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and she obviously probably regretted that because it was so successful, God, this is like proper, like it's like a music video sort of love scene, isn't it? It's so like
suddenly Def Leppard seems appropriate.
Yeah, need some meatloaf here. That's what you need. Or White Snake. Oh, White Snake, that'd be perfect.
Oh, God almighty. I bet Van Damme loved putting all this stuff in.
See, everyone looks like they haven't had a shower in months or years, and everyone would stink of BO. God. You're overbearing. I mean, you suppose you get used to it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I don't stink, you stink.
I love as well that Van Damme was meant to have a lot more blood and gore on him, on his face for that scene on the cross, but he didn't want his beautiful visage to be obscured by makeup, so he would only allow a certain amount of blood and mess. You gotta love him, haven't you?
At this stage as well, this is what must be his third production.
Yeah, exactly.
We did something before No Retreat, No Surrender, but like small things.
Well, yeah, but Monaco Forever or whatever it's called, Joey's the gay hitchhiker.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and he's got obviously his hip hop dancing in the background of oh god, is it Breakin' 2? One of the Breakin' movies.
I think it's the first one actually.
Is it the first one?
Yeah. And he's so over egging it just to sort of so people can see him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's he's the only one moving about in the crowd to make sure he's on camera all the time.
Yeah. Love it, absolutely love it. One of the greatest cameos ever. And yeah, No Retreat, No Surrender. Then Bloodsport, which then sat on the shelf for like over 6 months, maybe a year, when they re-edited the movie. So yeah, then it goes into must be going to this, right?
Yeah. This was
he did Black Eagle, didn't he?
Black Eagle, but like No Retreat, No Surrender, it's a villain role, so he's kind of just a hired. This was only the second Jean-Claude Van Damme movie after Bloodsport, to my mind, although he'd appeared in other things.
And so his ego's already in full swing.
Well, you get the feeling he was born with it, don't you?
But he was Van Damme was like a nerd, wasn't he? Like he's always portrayed himself as he had glasses. He was a bit of a wimp, and that's why he sort of made got into good shape and did ballet, then mixed up with karate.
Yeah, I think he's a man of contradictions and many facets.
This should be part of the BBFC warning. Contains contradictions. I also have it in the BBFC. It contains mild peril. I'm like, it doesn't say mild peril. I'm a bit annoyed. I always need some peril.
You see how it doesn't matter how strong that girl's hands are. What she's got on the end of that wire is a lot heavier than her. She's just going to be dragged down.
Should have gone straight down it with them. It's literally like seeing those videos where someone's got a massive dog and the dog sees something and it pulls them.
Yeah.
And they've got like the dog lead. They just go flying off camera. It's great.
So we assume then that the wife and boy died in the well before he climbed out.
Yeah. I hope so. Just live.
That's another thing I've often wondered. Like, why did he just leave them down there?
Yeah. It's like, this relationship's not working. I'm just going to go. Oh, look, there's a shot of them. Yeah. His teeth are very clean for this kind of post-apocalyptic world with no toothpaste and toothbrush.
He must have that, was it cat gut toothpaste that Denzel Washington uses in The Road, which Pune said inspired him to make this film, despite the fact The Road wasn't written till years after this was made.
Oh, great.
He was also, I noticed in the commentary, it did make me laugh, he said by wanting to make it black and white and kind of downbeat, he was inspired by the great Norwegian filmmakers. And I'm fairly sure he meant Swedish when he said that. I'm not aware of any great Norwegian filmmakers particularly associated with those characteristics. Like a couple of Swedish ones, though.
So this movie contains 2 matte paintings, and the first one really does a great job. I think I may have said earlier on, like setting up the world, and the locations where they're going to be, and then you see another great shot of like they're getting near the end now, and you see like it's all kind of bluish kind of design where you see kind of the whole city just destroyed. I mean, it really gives it scope, and that's all your movies used to do was have like maybe 2 to 4 matte paintings to expand the world, and you buy into it.
Exactly. And they had, I forget the name, the family who did most of the effects, but they're kind of legendary, aren't they? God, I can't remember.
Well, it's Fantasy too. I can't remember the family's name, but yeah, they're like, the gentleman who had owned the company, his father had worked on the Time Machine, won an Oscar, and he won an Oscar as well, I think, for T2. And obviously, they did a lot of they did high, mid, and low tier budget movies, didn't they? So, they're always very good.
A lot of these effects and so on companies do, don't they? It's an interesting job, I think.
They were like a really sort of multi-skilled effects house, weren't they? Because they did stop motion, they did matte paintings, they did opticals, they did miniature stuff. They did everything. Where a lot of companies,
here's that other matte shot,
sort of farm stuff out to different companies who specialise in certain things. Obviously, with CGI now, they still do that. They farm it out to loads because there's so much of a heavy workload, isn't there? But when you were in that industry, Rob, did you sort of know that certain companies were good at doing the miniature work, or sort of great, some are better at doing previs, or sort of all 3D rendering? I don't know, but
I was very much. It was a myopic world. It was CG. And compositing as well, which goes along with CG and can be done without it. But we didn't have any contact with like practical effects people, really. But it was the same deal, though. You worked on, Harry Potter one day and some obscure thing being done as a favour for someone the next day that's, very low budget.
Right.
But it rather less creativity there. It's like that the reason I got into it is because I like movies. I like sci-fi movies with special effects. There's a big special effects industry in the UK. That's what I'll do. And then you get into it, and okay, I thought I was going to be surrounded by people who were passionate about, making effects and doing it. And it's just, you know, rows and rows of nerds sitting in the dark with headphones on.
Oh no, that's not fun. See, you always imagine it'd be like the 80s, where it's a bit more like, well, before CGI, where you've got this kind of energy there, and everyone like in rooms creating things physically, and
Yeah, exactly.
sort of surrounded by like the British crew, just like a bunch of you know, typical guys who are a bit overweight and they're cockneys, you know, but
Drinking tea, complaining.
Yeah. Now there's a bit coming up here where Van Damme has a bow and arrow, but I don't think he actually has an arrow.
Oh, yeah.
It's great. He just pretends to fire it.
Fair enough. I've never noticed.
Oh, that was great. Here's going to come the classic fight scene that is requires, well, it sort of results in a lot of screaming at each other.
Yeah,
Which always makes me laugh. And also you've got the Van Damme edits, and there's a great scene coming up where he's in the car and he kicks Fender through the window. But weird how it's edited. It looks like his leg extends when you see it. Like it just gets longer and longer. You know, it's like when you see it, it's quite obvious.
but yeah, the sound effects in this sequence, I really remembered that when I watched it back again. Just his ridiculous grunting, and it sounds like an old video game before video games kind of got a bit more self-aware.
Sort of sounds, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's the moment where the stuntman was injured. I don't think he actually lost his eye, although that has been how it's been reported.
This stuff is all so well lit, though. It's fun. It's brilliant.
It looks great, doesn't it?
Yeah, the mix of just like orange and blues with the fire.
I remember it being heavy rain.
Yeah, it does kick in. The rain kicks in a minute
Right.
when the screaming starts, or like, heavy grunting. You know. There wasn't the lady who was the cyborg, wasn't she? Like the first lady to be sort of featured on Sports Illustrated, I think.
I do remember hearing something like that. Yeah.
She was like, you know, the sort of, you know, she then made her sort of a big deal to sort of be in this movie just because she wore a bikini. I don't know.
They've literally just turned the rain machine on, haven't they? Did we go inside for a few seconds, came back outside, and it's now...
Oh, he's got Van Damme, so kick him. What's it? 3, 4, 5, 6. He's still kicking him in the same place. It's still going. It's in the can. Here we go.
jumping in the air each time.
Ah, great Van Damme kicks.
He does look good doing it, though, doesn't he? There's a reason he blew everyone away when he suddenly hit the scene.
Oh God, yeah. We're all, at that age, you know, you're easily impressed by a really good kick. You know,
Yeah.
I still am to this day. If someone does a really
absolutely.
good kick, I'm like, oof, that's good. You know,
But it's funny. I'd only seen like Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee movies, I suspect, around that time. Probably not many of those. So for some reason, Van Damme just seemed so much more impressive to me than either. It only lasted a couple of years, that viewpoint. But for a spell, he was just so amazing.
because Jackie was, the fights were so elaborate, but the kick in that fight in Jackie's fight scene wouldn't be focused on. It would just be part of the fight scene.
Exactly. Yeah, there'd just be a blur of action.
Yeah, with Van Damme, it was very much the focus of seeing a really well placed kick. I mean, Bruce Lee was all about like the speed, wasn't it? And,
Yeah.
like, him selling the idea that he was basically invincible. And no one's ever going to be able to replicate what Bruce Lee sounded like when he screamed and like, you know, did his moves and all that channeled all that energy into a punch. You know, no one could replicate that.
No. Definitely not these two.
Shouty. See, also as well, the shot. Pune has shot this a lot of close-ups. You can't see what's going on. That's the annoying thing. Pune does do that in his movies. He often don't get to fully see what's happening.
Yeah, that's meant to be more sort of like almost an abstract emotional reaction we're meant to be having, I think, to that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But when you're sort of looking at it as an action movie, you think, oh, it's kind of messing up here. This is a bit where he kicks him in a minute, and he hits him with a door, and I think when he attacks the lady who'd been his companion throughout the movie, she gets stabbed, and Van Damme does his kick. That's sort of how it's edited. It's very bizarre.
That's a pretty thankless role, isn't it? I can't believe I've forgotten her name. Deborah Richter, is that it? Deborah Richter.
Yes, that's the actress.
That's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's a pretty thankless role. She's doesn't have anything important to do. She takes her clothes off a couple of times, gets turned down by Van Damme, and then just killed in a really kind of lazy and irrelevant way.
Yeah, we don't really get to know. You get a little bit of her sort of what she's doing, but you don't really get to know much about her, other than that she's just like tagging along and just looks fed up basically.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here comes the kick. Watch. Kick. Kick. Kick.
Oh
kick.
yes.
It looks like his leg just extends.
It's like dousing.
Weird. Yeah, douse him. Yeah.
We don't even. She doesn't even really get a shot of. We kind of see it through a dirty window from Van Damme's perspective. The moment of impact.
He just walked into that door. He's just bouncing off stuff, isn't he? Here we go.
This is proper I'm not an actor type acting, isn't it? Just the physicality of it is. You can just tell he's not an actor.
He can outflex the other. God, he's so tense now. God. He kind of. They should have also played the idea that Fender was a cyborg or something as well.
Yeah, why not make more of a deal of it?
Yeah, just sort of like to say, oh yeah, because he's so stiff as an actor. He's a robot, isn't he? So.
But yeah, for it to be called Cyborg, you really want a lot of cyborg action, frankly, and there isn't really any. There's just a couple of shots.
Or Van Damme had a cyborg leg or something.
Yeah.
Some sort of, cyborgish kind of like part of his body was like a bit robotic,
Yeah.
something in there. Here we go. He slashes him. One slash. So many edits there for one slash. Yeah, break his arm. Come on. Ooh, that's good.
Ooh. And there's the Terminator's lightning.
Yeah. So he thinks he's killed him and he comes back, doesn't he? So this will be the point, like, oh my god, he's a cyborg. He's not actually...
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, look at that. You see?
It could be the rain's making him short-circuit a bit and twitchy and sparks coming off him.
Sparks are coming off him. Like, bzz. He's like, oh my god. Van Damme just randomly kick her in the face. Take her out.
It drops out of focus here.
A little bit. I think it's just the rain, isn't it? Trying to
the
focus
rain.
pull that. I think they're just trying to look through the lens. It's all like the soaks, probably.
It is very heavy rain, though.
Yeah, God, it wouldn't have been nice to film that. Or maybe if they did it in the summer, it would have been an absolute because New Orleans, you just spend a lot of time just sweating. Everything's so muggy. I think was this like a pickup stuff as well? Like the fight scene was extended. Yeah. I think they made use of another set from another movie. It's like Nemesis.
Yes, this is from Deceit, the one he made after this. Yeah, I think I remember reading something about. I don't think that the Deceit was a canon movie, and I think Pune basically charged them to use the set that some other studio had built for him, and he made more money from that than he did from directing it or something.
That's great. I mean, Deceit was probably some like a Imperial Entertainment or something, or a Corman venture or something. I don't know. So he did the Van Damme kick there, 3 kicks from in one edit. You know, that's great stuff.
In my mind, that's just how Van Damme kicks.
It's magic. Impaled him on a hook. Very Hellraiser.
Yeah, again, it looks good though. It's nicely lit.
Yeah, it does look nice. It's good photography. Even though it's kind of weird at the top, where you've got the rotating blade, looks like sunlight.
Yeah, I was just thinking that actually.
It doesn't quite match, you know. But there
just
you go.
Bright sunlight streaming in the middle of the night.
There's 2 weather systems going on there. Come on, cyborg lady, you've done nothing, and the whole film's named after you.
He literally has 3 different female sidekicks throughout at different stages of the film, doesn't he? Because he starts with a bit of her, then Nardi, and then goes off with the niece, daughter, whatever she is. Yeah, and that's not Van Damme as well, is it?
No, it's a double.
Funnily enough,
Van Damme was late on set.
Somehow I've always thought that just doesn't look like Van Damme, and the fact that he's very clearly concealing his head. But yeah, watching the commentary, Pune mentions
it's
it.
so obvious. He's got his arse bent over it.
Clearly taller than him as well. And he's not got his Simon Cowell trousers halfway up his stomach like Van Damme likes.
Oh man, yeah, it's always kind of most obvious with the Simon Cowell trousers in like Double Impact and things like that. AWOL, his trousers are quite high.
Yes, yeah, they are. And Kickboxer, the bar scene in Kickboxer, I think that's as high as they get.
But you needed that high to do those kicks, don't you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, as you mentioned, that is his stand-in because he was late to set a few times, and I believe they started shooting with a stand-in. Van Damme saw him on set and wasn't late again.
Well, that was a common thing with Van Damme, always being late on set. And remember, Peter McDonald just said, "Like, if you fuck around, we're not going to get this filmed till late. If you get on set on time, we'll be out by a decent hour, and you can go out and do whatever you want, you know, like party and stuff." Man, it's like, okay, sort of did what he was told, you know. But some directors, you know, don't put up with him, you know, and his attitude.
I think this, I reckon, has to be something that was shot in pickups, if not by Van Damme, because the what this guy says now, something about actually, I think the future's him or something like that. It makes no sense whatsoever in context unless you've got a raging egotist making, you know, in charge of the movie by that point.
So, Rob,
Marvellous.
Final thoughts on Cyborg.
I've really, really enjoyed digging back into it and watching it again with you as always. But I think it really stands up as a visually speaking. I think it really stands up. It's got some of there's not as much or as accomplished fight scenes in it as there are other Van Damme movies of this era. But I like the balance of fighting. I like the fact it's more of a generic action movie than just a martial arts movie, as Kickboxer and Bloodsport at the time were. And yeah, it just looks fantastic.
I like that it's not too ambitious. You know, it does what it needs to do with its lower budget, and the visual effects still kind of stand up, and they're quite limited anyway. So they're not like in your face, and the film's not stuffed with ropey matte lines or blue screen. It's very much like very gritty, very textured looking movie. And despite Van Damme not really saying much, he looks the part, and he looks great on screen. And the fighting, it's not too elaborate as as we come to see with later Van Damme features, and the editing's a little bit too choppy. But I think Van Damme did a great job of salvaging kind of Albert Pune's kind of somewhat kind of messy vision for this feature. But I don't blame Pune in that regard, because he kind of had to sort of hastily put something together to save Canon from wasting their money, and delivered something that is all of them really, because filmmaking is a creative team effort, and Van Damme, thankfully, kind of with the help of Sheldon, kind of made a successful film out of what they'd shot. And it's always a bit misleading though with the title Cyborg, and there isn't really any cyborg stuff in it apart from like right at the very beginning, and you see like a bit where they're operating on the cyborg. That's about it. But it's such a simple, effective name, and the poster art is so iconic and eye-catching. In classic canon tradition, you as a kid, you're going to go, I want to see that movie. You know what I mean? You're not going to be like, if you look at something like if you, I don't know, other movies from '89, like if I mentioned Lethal Weapon 2, the cover of that is very basic, but if you put it next to Cyborg looks so much more enticing.
Or AWOL from a couple of years later, or Lionheart as it's known in America. I've always been baffled by that poster art, which is just Van Damme standing next to a train. That was like that was kind of weird, like stuff they'd shot for like maybe the German release, which I think was called Full Contact or something. And the UK one had that. It said AWOL, didn't it? We staying at a train thing. But the American one just has him like posing with his hair slicked back, and it was him from Double Impact as one of the other twins. So I don't think they ever actually got the marketing right for that movie, or with its poster anyway. Yeah.
But yeah, it was an old one. But yeah, it's not one of Van Damme's best. It's not one of my favourite sort of Van Damme, but I think it still has its moments, and it still makes money.
Yeah,
this movie does it because it keeps getting re-released. Movies that keep getting re-released still make a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think it's a objectively better film than most, if not anything, he's made in the last 25 odd years.
Jean-Claude.
Yeah. I'd much rather watch a movie like that, or even what's that prison one? I've forgotten what it's called now. Death something or other. It's dreadful.
Death Warrant. Oh, I like Death Warrant. I thought dreadful.
But to be honest, I've not seen it for a long time, and I'm assuming it will appear dreadful. But just my aesthetic, the way I work, what I like is I would rather watch something shot on real sets with 35mm film with edited like that. I'd much rather watch that than anything modern.
Death Warrant has a good premise, but it's kind of undone by its like silly attempts to introduce like a villain who is like the Sandman, who's just kind of wasted and has no real like screen time till the beginning, and at the end he's back, and that's kind of it.
I haven't seen it since the late 90s, I don't think.
Yeah, it's all right. You should maybe give it another go. Well, folks, that is the end of the commentary. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure me and Rob will be back in future with some more commentaries. But for now, take care of yourselves and goodbye.
Goodbye.